Hi, this is John, and today I am reading and analyzing Wallace Stevens' poem, Earthy, Anecdote. Let's read it first. Every time the bucks went clattering over Oklahoma, a fire cat bristled in the way. Wherever they went clattering, until they swerved in a swift, circular line to the right, because of the fire cat. Or until they swerved in a swift, circular line to the left, because of the fire cat. The bucks clattered. The fire cat went leaping, to the right, to the left, and bristled in the way. Later, the fire cat closed his bright eyes and slept. Let's first start with the title itself, Earthy Anecdote. What is an anecdote? A short, amusing story about some incident. And earthy? Well, first, it can mean simply of the earth or soil. Of course, it also can mean direct and uninhibited, particularly about sexual matters. Perhaps time to send the kids out of the room. So what is the dramatis personae of this anecdote? First, we have bucks, which are male deer or antelope. They're merely spoken of in the plural, so we don't know how many. There are at least two of them. And a single fire cat, which could mean it's a fire orange cat, a cat the color of intensely fiery orange, or a cat-like entity consisting of fire. The poem starts off with every time, which is interesting since an anecdote is generally about an incident. This appears to be a repetitive incident. We're told that the bucks went clattering. Well, before we deal with clattering or anything else about the action, let's look at this verb structure, went clattering, or more specifically to that structure, to go xing, where clattering is x. Um, Generally speaking, when we use this structure to go xing, we're talking about planned activities that are intended. And when you talk about intention, we're talking about the things that people do. They plan and then they execute them. For example, we went skiing or we went hiking. As I put here, to intentionally go to a place to do something. Sorry for that split infinitive. Now, this strikes us as funny because we're talking about animals here. So perhaps these are animal characters who have taken on the tendencies, the ability to plan, well, for lack of a better word, creatures with agency like humans who are going to do things uh, that are premeditated. So we're less likely to think of these as creatures of the world as opposed to creatures of an imagined world. With that said, it is possible, obviously, for either animals or inanimate objects or things, objects, even complex objects, to be featured in the real world in this particular verbal construction. Case in point, when I use the word clattering. For example, I could say that a train went clattering along the track, or the debris went clattering along the road. Of course, what does clattering mean? Well, to strike noisily on a surface, for example. Notice that to clatter is not a unitary single impact. It's at least a series, at least a handful, at the very least, a small number of impacts created as something moves, at least one thing moves, or several things move over at least a short period of time. We think of that famous poem about Santa. There arose such a clatter. Obviously, Santa with his goods, perhaps coming down the chimney, and of course, striking those goods here and there against the inner surface of the chimney, or even as he moves with his heavy boots along the floor. We can identify, it's indistinct, exactly what it is that is creating the sound. Now, you can have an extended clatter, in which case we like to say this, it went clattering. As I said before, a train goes clattering outside of my window, there's a track, and perhaps for a minute, of the wheels of the train along the track. Now, we do need context, generally speaking, if I say clattering. As I said, the train went clattering along the rail, or the train went clattering past. Here, the context is every time the Bucks went clattering over Oklahoma. Now, while over Oklahoma does give the context of the clattering, which we do need in one form or another, uh, it's strange to think of Oklahoma as being a surface over which something would clatter. In fact, uh, Oklahoma is really kind of if you want to call it a surface, it is a surface of surfaces. It's a place of many, many countless places. Mathematically, you could think of it as a set. And of course, in this Oklahoma, the place of places, the places, be they towns or mountains or farms, are so far from one another that anything that happens within them will be unto that place itself. In a sense, what happens in Oklahoma stays in Oklahoma. What happens in a particular place in Oklahoma will not necessarily be known to other places in Oklahoma. It'll be an event that will be particularly of that place in Oklahoma. Now, Oklahoma strikes us as very, very familiar, particularly those of us who live in America. And so we maybe think that we know something about the place where this is happening. But it's deceptive because just saying Oklahoma really tells us nothing about the place. We would have to search, given the fact that Oklahoma is a big place, we would have to search far and wide in order to have a hope of coming across this place. So actually, in a sense, Oklahoma creates an uncertainty in us, which is funny because it seems so familiar. It's maybe turning familiarity on its head. Now, with that said, another problem is the use of the adjective over for Oklahoma. Now, I can use over with verbs of motion. And specifically, I mean motion along the ground. For example, as John Philip Sousa once memorably wrote, "Over hill, over dale, we will hit the dusty trail." So over can be used for surfaces that we would locomote over, we would walk, we would drive, we would ride, and provided that those surfaces didn't have any obstructions that would stop us. We would imagine well, for example, there's a trail over a hill, there's a trail through the dale, and the trail intimates that there are no obstacles. Now, in this way, over almost has a figurative sense implicitly. Literally, when we talk about something being over, there's a void, there's a space of air between you and the thing. But when we use the word over, it's as though we are flying over it because there's nothing stopping us. That the progress we make on the road is as effortless as flying through the air. However, you can't use over with a state. I can't say I went over New York. I live in New York. Because if I use it like that, then over means that I'm flying. I'm above the ground. I can use over with a state only with the inclusion of another word. I searched all over New York. So we could imagine that this would be correct if I simply had included that one syllable word, all with it. Perhaps that's why it doesn't offend us as we read it. However, if I'm being true to the meaning of over, if I say every time the Bucks went clattering over Oklahoma, that would have to mean that they were aloft. They were not touching the ground. But then this poses a problem. How is it that a buck, we could consider a buck like a train a complex object, how can a buck clatter? Well, I can say the buck's hooves clattered along the road. I can speak from experience. Once I was driving in East Hampton, and wouldn't you know that there was a deer, many, many deer there, and Just beside my car was a big buck clattering down the main street. Something I'll always remember. The buck's antlers clattered as they collided. Ah, now when do bucks collide with one another? Well, it's in what we call the rutting season, or as those in the know call it, when bucks are in the rut. And of course, the rut is that hormonally charged season when bucks go in search of does for the sake of procreation. And in that madness, in that so to speak, insanity of the mating rituals, um, one buck will square off against another buck, and often injure each other, colliding at a high speed, uh, and attempting to drive off the other bucks so that it has sole dominion over a doe or does in its vicinity. Ah, and here's where we start to get into the earthiness of this story. The earthiness is discussing sexual matters with frankness and directness in an uninhibited way. And it's hard to think of a better word than uninhibited when you are dealing with bucks who are almost have a homicidal intent. They're willing to kill in order to procreate. But now enter the other character, the fire cat. It says a fire cat bristled in the way. Like this one. I can't think of a better uh, uh, rendering of a fire cat bristling. Now, cats will bristle when they're alarmed or frightened. The bristling gives the impression that the cat is much more bigger and ferocious than it perhaps really is, and it's meant to uh, deter or inhibit another creature who has entered the space or potentially threatens the cat. So we return to the question of just what the fire cat is. Is it just a literal normal cat that is just a fiery shade of red that bristles and in bristling really does resemble a flame, or rather has a flame-like intensity? Because it's an earthy anecdote, it's of the earth. So I think that sets bounds upon how we are to imagine the fire cat, even though the name kind of opens us up to wider imaginings. That is this an imaginary creature, an elemental entity consisting of fire? Well, apparently not, because this is an earthy uh, poem, an earthy anecdote. So this cat should be itself like the anecdote of the earth. Since I anticipate the next stanza will take a fairly long time to talk about, I'm going to just end the first video of my analysis here. There will probably be two or three subsequent ones, so I'll see you in those. Bye bye.